So now, without further ado, I would like to welcome Kathy Peretta, Vice President of Ipsos's Marketing Strategy Team. Kathy, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Ellen, and welcome everyone to our highlight sharing of this year's Canada CHATS 2023 Trends Report. We're really excited to announce that today's session is aligned to our full CHATS report launch, which is going to be sent out to subscribing clients tomorrow. And for those of you who are not familiar with CHATS, it stands for Consumption Habits and Attitudinal Trends. It's an annual study produced by our syndicated food and beverage group, and it's hard to believe, but this is the 9th edition. Last year, we focused our efforts on understanding the consumer through the varying pandemic phases, from the pre-pandemic phase through to the 2022 post-pandemic period. When we look ahead this year, we project that 2023 will be a year of continued disruption. Instead of consumers adjusting to a new normal, like many of us hoped would follow the really tumultuous COVID period, as we look ahead, this year's change is really going to be fueled by a complex set of environmental worries, both old and new, that are impacting not only consumer confidence, but also consumer behavior. So consider consumers' adjustments to the pandemic residual impacts, and those are legacy impacts from the pandemics that have been rediscovered by consumers and now are part of daily behavior. Think about home enjoyment, baking, cooking more, TV, or really probably actually streaming, and pantry loading more often. At the same time, consumers have adjusted, gaining on to relatively new habits that we had to adopt during the lockdown period. And now some consumers may even actually prefer these. Think about working from home, online shopping, more usage of restaurant delivery services, even more virtual social connections online. Of course, emerging inflation concerns are definitely prompting change. And in the food and beverage marketplace, it's notable in our data captured at shelf. So we're seeing emerging habits like channel shifting, moving from conventional grocery to discount banners en masse, increasing usage of promotional activities, usage of coupons, loyalty points, other savings mechanisms. And in our last couple of monthly releases, we've started to see trading out habits emerging in the data. Now, in addition to the pandemic and the cost concerns, there is also a convergence of geopolitical and climate change impacts that are really contributing to the heightened sense of unpredictability. Think about gas pricing, up 17% versus January alone. There's also severe weather impacts. We had 9 named storms this year. And I was actually stunned to learn that in 2022, we saw more wildfires reported than in the past 10 years, burning 7.5 million acres of land. So with so many colliding forces to drive this instability now, more than at any time that I've ever seen in over 20 years that I've been tracking consumption behavior, it is really critical to focus and more deeply understand how consumers are responding. Now, the good news is that the food and beverage industry at large is getting much better at both forecasting the future and I think also in nimbly adapting to the change dynamics. It's something that we've had to do. And so the objective of our annual trend sharing is not specifically to focus on categories and brands, but really is to take a step back and focus on the all-important consumer. There's a number of applications for the trends data, but really key to usage is understand that your strategies are actually on trend based on how people are actually eating and drinking. To determining emerging behavioral patterns so you can identify new targeting, positioning, and complementary partnership opportunities. To look at your innovation pipeline. Are your new products targeted to the largest and the fastest rising needs? And then finally, I think really importantly, to empower your Catman and your sales teams with the trends that are influencing overall behavior so they can more successfully partner with retailers and food service operators in that true thought leadership role. So for our sharing today, we're going to look at some of those select macro trends. We're going to take a little bit of a unique view at conscious consumption priorities, touch on the all-important day part impacts, and then I'm going to leave you with some closing thoughts. So we at Ipsos know that there are a number of trends reports available in the marketplace. However, our food and beverage group takes somewhat of a different approach in sizing, investigating, and evaluating the trend impacts on our clients' business. Our sharing is supported by the strength of our syndicated studies practice, and it's a suite of ongoing tracking services. The primary source for the report is our 5 study, and those of you who are not familiar with 5, it stands for the 5 W's: the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. We're in field every day, tracking over 20,000 individual Canadians in an annual period since 2013. And while behavior across all categories, brands, day parts, and venues is the primary objective of this study, we're also tracking the whys: rich situational dynamics, motivations, health statuses, preparation detail, lifestyle beliefs, all which we can tie to purchase dynamics. We've also leveraged a little bit of our food service monitor, which is a really deep and rich tracking of commercial food service channels. It's been in place since 2014, and we're also leveraging some data from our Ipsos Essential study. Now, this is a global tracking. We've lifted some of the Canadian data, but it really is a comprehensive view of the global dynamics of attitudes, sentiment, and behavior overall. In totality, we're looking at over 50,000 individuals every year to really paint that unparalleled consumer picture of eating and drinking in Canada. And there is a lot of opportunity to dig deeper than the sharing that we have for you today, so keep that in mind. Now, as we wade deeper into this inflationary, some people might even want to call it recessionary cycle, consumers today are really refocusing on what value means to them. And our data really confirms that daily assessments are more intentional as consumers look at how to spend precious time and hard-earned money, and also understanding how they can fit products into multiple usage dynamics. Certainly, this is an important criteria for the industry, but also more important for your business. So in this pandemflation era, as I like to call it, we want to understand how these macro factors are impacting the following trends. So really understanding the home environment, how we're cooking and preparing, the notion of affordable indulgences, and how important flexibility is in this very unique period. Also need to understand the food service channel inextricably tied to the success at retail and how that is rebounding. Of course, the social context, activity at snacks and meals, the conversation and the connection and engagement is also important, and to many categories, special occasions and how that's evolving is something that we're going to take a look at. Of course, needs drive choices, but how those needs are changing and evolving over time is something that is absolutely critical to shaping strategies. Convenience certainly as important as hunger and thirst, and so we look at things like the pantry, plan versus impulse, formats consumers are opting for, and then, as I mentioned, some of those all-important channel dynamics. Consumers continue to focus on information, the digitization of food, certainly fueling the rise of things like plant-based. We look at flexitarianism in the report overall. And then finally, focusing on health and the all-important lens of health and how it is being much more personal than we've seen in prior periods. Now, when we look at the universe of consumption, very important to note that the average Canadian now consumes a food or commercial beverage 20 times a day. And that is down 2.2% versus 2021, and it's down even more notably if we compare it to 2020. Canadians are consuming fewer items, and if this trend continues, ultimately it will result in buying fewer items. Overall, consumers report to us that their occasion simplification, or the simplification of the number of items they're consuming, is a common tactic that they're employing in this environment of rising prices. But I wonder if less being more, less consumption, less weight, which is a really dominant theme among younger cohorts, might be something that might be prominent for many years to come. So for retailers and manufacturers alike, take note that slowing consumption rates may be an indication of slowing demand. We certainly know that a rising share of Canadians are prioritizing their spending patterns, and that's certainly born out of concerns around inflation. 42% of Canadians in our Essentials report that inflation and rising prices are the #1 concern. But if we look ahead to the next month and we look at future or intended purchases over the next month, it's interesting to note that groceries, food and groceries, remain atop the list of future spending, and in many cases doubling other discretionary spend categories. I think a key element driving this prioritization of food is the bolstering of daily enjoyment and experience, and some people like to refer to it as the lipstick effect. I like to call it the affordable indulgence indicator, treating oneself when larger ticket spending is curbed by those inflationary pressures and headwinds. Our data shows that 7 in 10 consumers today report that they treat themselves with the foods and beverages that they purchase, and that's up from last year. So affordable indulgence indicator in place. The other thing, though, I think to keep in mind is, like lipstick often is less about coloring your lips and more about the experience. When we think about affordable indulgences, it's less about the category itself and more about the pleasure or the experience that it evokes. So as we know, the lipstick effect or the affordable indulgence remains strong. The vast majority of Canadians report to us that they are undertaking changes in their daily consumption and shopping routines in the midst or to combat rising food and beverage prices. Now, there is an enormous number of strategies that are being implemented to mitigate food cost, but at the top of the list are product price comparison, cooking at home more often, buying the lowest brands, people wanting to eat out less or reporting they will eat out less, and also buying on impulse. All of these factors, interestingly, shift by generation, by household dynamic, by household income, and so it's certainly something that you want to keep your finger on the pulse of. When we talk about and we think about rising price environment, one of the things that we look at in our 5 data is actually how this environment is changing the decisions that we make around eating and drinking. And we coin this the value trigger, defined by 2 elements: value for money and saving money. So think about yourself, you're in your kitchen, you're thinking about what you're going to make for dinner tonight, and you think to yourself, well, last night, we had a roast dinner, we had a great dessert and a bottle of wine. That was an expensive meal. I think tonight we'll opt for something different. Maybe we'll have some pasta. That's the value trigger at work, shifting the decision about what we're going to eat and drink. 34% of all occasions are motivated by the value trigger. It's much more prominent at meals. And if we think of the dinner occasion, almost half of all dinner occasion decisions are influenced by the value trigger. For snacking and beverages, the rates are less because there are a number of other motivations and priorities. Doesn't mean it's not important, it's just less involved in the decision-making criteria. If we looked at that value trigger, you can see that when we're deciding what to eat and drink, good value for money plays a larger role than saving money, but saving money is rising at a far higher rate. In past recessionary periods, generic labels, so control and private label, also played a notable role in the trade down scenarios. If we look currently, the generic label represents about 12% of all consumption servings. It's up 5% over last year. It obviously plays a very different role depending on what categories we're looking at. And I think it's also interesting because it shifts by cohort. If we looked at multicultural Canadians, they are far less likely to buy generic label products, led by Chinese Canadians, who are the least likely of multicultural cohorts to buy generic labels. So we certainly know that those generic labels still show lower development in meeting quality, premiumness, and a battery of emotional needs relative to national brands, but they are still very strongly developed for saving money. So when we think about those consumers who are most developed for wanting to save money and who are increasing in share, there are some habits that look different relative to the balance of the population. Those people who are strongly motivated to save money, they eat less fresh produce, both fruit and vegetables. They eat less cheese. They eat less specialty breads, less select beef cuts, less yogurt and bacon, while enjoying more often things like rice and pasta, beans. It's a great time to be in the frozen category overall because of its value attributes. They also act differently. They prepare more at home. They use the microwave more often. They pantry load more often. They buy more on sale. They shop more at discount. And as I mentioned earlier, they use more generic label products. Questions like, do they snack more often? Does their value or their saving money have implications for health or better for you products? Do they visit restaurants less? These are all addressed within the context of the report. We also know that pantry loading has been rising notably over the past couple of years, and we also know that it is a strategy that is used by Canadians to mitigate rising costs. With a greater share of individuals engaging in the behavior, it's interesting to look back and see that it is not for price alone, obviously a driving factor, but it was really initiated during the pandemic period where people didn't want to be caught without. There were fewer shopping trips. So today, when we ask Canadians why they pantry load more often, there's an intersection of needs. Certainly, buying on value and sale and saving money is important, but wanting to have those items more regularly used on hand, reducing going to the store, preparing for potentially future shortages. I think it's also important to keep in mind that there is a considerable share of Canadians who don't pantry load. And the top reasons for those not pantry loading is available space and actually just the sheer cost of pantry loading, not affordable in a regular grocery shopping trip. So think about promotional activity and how you might want to diversify it from more larger packs or multi-packs. Think about buy one now, get a discount later. I think it's just important to remember that not everybody wants to, or more importantly, not everybody can afford to pantry load on an ongoing basis. So another thing that's been very notable and that I've talked more recently about is the interconnection between retail and food service and the distribution of occasions. For players on the retail side of the business, you have been the beneficiary of the last few years compared to those on the food service side of the business. However, I think it's really critical to keep aware, regardless of your positioning, of how the entirety of the market is performing. So if we look at a distribution of occasions, the general split between retail and food service is generally an 80-20 split with some monthly seasonality. Through the varying pandemic phases, the initial pandemic saw a big bump up for retail. And then we saw some slowing in retail as food service made some gains, particularly between January and August. But there's been a notable halt in those gains in September, and our most recent October data release confirms a similar story. So while we did see positive dollar sales in the first half of the year, it was not totally reflected in traffic. So dollar sales in the 12 months ending September 2022 were up 7%, but traffic in that similar period was actually down compared to the pre-pandemic period by 7%. And if we look at it by the different channels, quick service, full service, retail, and all traffic in those channels remains down versus the pre-pandemic period. Lunch is the most challenged day part, with dinner performing much better. I'd expect over the next year that for those in the QSR industry, that lipstick effect or affordable indulgence might prompt some future growth. But as I say fairly regularly, make no mistake about it, food service operators need to think about growth somewhat differently than in the past. Rather than brands stealing share from one another, they need to think about strategies and tactics that are targeted at retail to find growth in such a challenging environment. So as we eat out less often, we're obviously eating at home more often. And if we look at the story of baking, very interesting story. In the initial pandemic, we saw a burst of baking, followed by a small dip off very high levels. But over the past year, we've seen a nice resurgence in home preparing baked goods. So if we look at sweet baked goods, both from scratch and from a mix or a dough or a kit are up versus ready to eat. I think there's lots of opportunity though for future growth, particularly with younger adult cohorts, special dietary needs and regimes in mind. If we look at meals and food preparation at meals, 72% of all food items consumed at meals are home prepared. In the context of the broader report, we look at changing preparation habits, methods, appliance usage, time spent, product formats, how we're enhancing our meals with different flavor enhancers, and looking how products are used generally. Now, the top reasons for cooking are the cost effectiveness, the enjoyment, healthier, trying new recipes, so diversifying the repertoire, improving cooking skills. We do see a little bit of cooking fatigue setting in with a declining share of scratch cooked items and more what we would call aided cooked items. So that's where we're cooking something, but there is one fully prepared item. Take, for example, the rotisserie chicken. We actually see consumption of rotisserie chickens rising. But people aren't eating rotisserie chickens as chicken more often. They're actually using it in the creation of other dishes. So buying a rotisserie chicken and using it in things like stir fry, Mexican dishes, tacos and fajitas, even in chicken sandwiches. And so when we think about meal solutions and the meal solutions consumers are looking for, we have to think about multicultural dishes and multicultural flavoring. 36% more meal preparers are actually cooking multicultural dishes than last year. And it is really led by younger cohorts. I'm a boomer. And just a short 30 or so years ago, a splash of soy sauce and rice was considered a daring multicultural dish. But boy, have we ever come a long way. And so to target that all-important younger consumer, the coveted Gen Z and the millennial cohorts, think about your multicultural dish strategy. Now, with more consumers, not only working from home, either in a full-time or hybrid role, more cooking from home, it begs the question, with all of our time investment, are we actually eating together more often? And it's pretty interesting to see The answer is no. While 52% of all meal occasions are shared, 49% are solo, that's rising, and a whopping 74% of snacks are consumed alone versus 26%, and the solo snacking is rising. I think we want to keep in mind that during the pandemic period, we had this community mindset. So putting the collective good before personal needs. However, now that we've emerged from that scenario, I think we can see consumers increasingly interested in focusing on themselves. And that is certainly true when we think about health. So the increased focus on self, the access to more information at, quite candidly, lightning speed, and awareness of our own personal health statuses is really contributing to this expansion of holistic health and more of a focus on me. So 46% of all occasions that are motivated by something healthy or nutritious are also driven by nutrient and nourishment. So think about quantities of specific nutrients, more of the good, less of the bad, but that's actually declined in favor of benefits, both physical benefits, so things like recover from physical activity, energy boost, invigoration, helps me sleep, to the all-important emotional well-being, which is up 5.2% versus last year. So think about positive state of mind, promoting harmony, stress-free, helps me think and focus. And this is all increasingly important because overall, 34% of individuals look for something healthy and nutritious with all of those sub-factors below in an average day. So lots of opportunity in the health space. One of the ways that we can target health and personalize it or customize it to individuals is by looking at individual metabolic criteria. So demonishes mass health messaging, provides a foundation to speak to consumers in a more personal and individualized ways. The quest for products that provide metabolic benefits is up 57% versus 2019, 57%. And when we look at individual products, of course, it shifts by food or beverage category. Overall, the top metabolic needs out of a battery of about 20 that we capture are led by things like weight control, digestive health, supporting immunity, assisting with vitamin deficiency, bone health. There's an enormous number of levers to help you personalize your health messaging and fill your innovation pipeline based on this shifting health criteria of consumers. Now, among adults, obviously, another thing we look at is the importance of label claims. And the top label claims currently on all food items made in Canada, followed by expiry date, all natural, high fiber, organic, good source of protein, and you can see the list. 58% of consumers today always or regularly consult labels. Be aware, these numbers are declining, and I'm wondering if it's noting a little bit of skepticism and discernment as the market becomes saturated with added value claims. Now, all of this comes in light of the government passing legislation about the new front of package warning information labels on most processed foods, or most packaged foods, I should say. 2/3 of Canadians say that it's going to impact their decision. But I think what is most telling is when we look at these different consumers who are saying this will impact their buying decisions by different categories. And interestingly, it's not the most indulgent categories that seem to be the most impacted. It's actually categories where there is a better for you aspect. So I think moving ahead, it's going to be really important to understand your category or the impact that this labeling will have on your category. I know our innovation team in Canada has been doing a lot of discrete choice work, helping our clients to understand or offset the negative impacts of the front of package labeling, whether it's a label rationalization strategy or product reformulation. So keep that in mind as we head towards the 2025 drop dead date for this legislation. Now, we know needs overall drive choices and how they important are. And within the 5 study, we capture a battery of 72 functional motivations and emotive attitudes every single day. It gives us a really good lens to see how are things changing and how are priorities changing over time. The top needs, and this is at a macro 80,000 foot level, hunger, thirst, taste, speed, ritual, health, and having things on hand. I think the greatest opportunity is in the future fit. So understanding what's rising and increasingly being prioritized by consumers. So we think about, at the top of the list, saving money, looking at things that are new and different, looking for energy boost and mental focus. There's those benefits in play. Thinking about special moment, social confidence, and also about ethical choices. So I did want to take a moment to talk to you about a topic that is increasingly, I think, shaping a lot of strategy discussions. And we know that there is a rising prioritization of ethical eating factors. It's a complex trend, but it's critical to understand. And when we look ahead and we've looked at some of the forecasting, expect that this will be one of the core drivers within a very few years. It's really a modern reflection, particularly among younger cohorts, of changing attitudes. So not only is it a way for these younger consumers to both outwardly project their belief system, but it's also a way for them to feel like they are giving back. So within the context of the 5 study, to condense all of the levers, we break it into 3 segments. We have product provenance, and this is all about the product, freshness, quality of the ingredients, locally produced. And I think there's been a lot of work in the industry already done around this topic. It actually remains relatively flat, though it is the biggest segment. Secondly, we see the environment, and we're tracking things like sustainable sourcing and packaging, regenerative farming, waste reduction, carbon neutrality, and that's actually up 6% versus last year. And then we're tracking social factors, things like fair treatment of workers, animal welfare, climate change. I think it's important that when we ask consumers how strongly these factors influence their decisions, this is a lot about what I say and potentially not necessarily what I do. And so there's many questions floating around businesses given the future importance of these levers. How and when do I activate? Our innovation team has done some great work working in the space with clients. And there's a case study that I'm going to share with you. They were kind enough to share with me, and it really focuses on challenging some hypotheses. Namely, does sustainability on scale impact product choices? Does messaging have to be on the front of the package to really effectively communicate or convert consumers? Will people pay more? The all-important question. So what they did is they took 2,000 US participants, they created an e-commerce shelf set, and they developed a dishwashing soap called Sustain. The first Sustain had no environmental claims, and the second one had an environmental claim that was led by bottle made with recycled ocean plastic. And they tested 3 price points. I don't think it's surprising that the Sustain in the light blue with the claims actually scored higher in a 5-point scale of consumer review because of the sustainable claims that were mentioned. But what's most interesting is when they positioned it relative to 3 price levels, you can see on the left-hand side of the page, on the right-hand side of the page, that when the pricing was at parity, dark blue, no claims, light blue claims, when pricing was at parity, there was a stronger choice for sustain with environmental claims. But as the pricing increased, the gains were pretty much wiped out. And I think there's a number of learnings. Now, first of all, the team can go much deeper to really help understand what's the sweet spot. I think if you're looking at well-executed sustainability claims on the fronted pack, it will evoke trial if there's no compromise or friction. But those gains seem to fall away when the pricing gets too high. So as we carve this path forward, it's going to be really important to understand what consumers are willing to trade off and what they're not willing to trade off. So remember our innovation team doing a lot of great work in this field. If we think about overall, wanted to touch on the day part highlights. As I mentioned earlier, we know that needs really drive choices, but the data's clear. Needs and the accompanying situational, activity dynamics, and trends do shift by day part. So the reason I chose to have that delicious Balders and cheddar cheese this morning is very different than why I might choose the same flavor and varietal and serve it to friends as part of a charcuterie board in the evening. So with that in mind, some of the core dynamics around occasions overall is understanding the size of the prize. So if we look at the share of food and beverage occasions, so these are the number of events during the day, the share of occasions, 34% of all occasions are meals and 66% at snack. Now, there's only one breakfast, one lunch, and one dinner, but there are a lot of snack events throughout the day. However, if we look at the number of servings by occasion, we know meals are more complex. So 52% of all servings are consumed at meals, 48% are consumed at snacks. So this detail really opens the door to understanding the size of the occasion prize, the share that you currently hold by day part, who to target, how to position your offer, what are the unique criteria or attributes required to win at that day part. And I think really important is understanding who you compete with outside of just your brands alone, being able to look at the cross-category dynamics. And in the context of the full report, we have a section on each of the day parts, but I wanted to give you a flavor for what's driving change at 2 day parts. So first of all, let's look at the breakfast recap. The top foods at breakfast this year: eggs, fresh fruit, toast, ready-to-eat cereal, yogurt, and hot cereal. Eat rates of many of those top foods are flat to decline, and there's a number of reasons why. First of all, consumers are simplifying breakfast occasion, and there's fewer side dishes. They're also skipping more meals, so the actual size of the breakfast prize has actually shrunk this year. We see rising demand out of home, both for portability, that's an opportunity, and also consumers using food service more often this year than they did last year at the breakfast occasion. Price sensitivity is actually a reason that is noted for declining fresh produce consumption, which we see actually across most day parts, and also yogurt is part of that. When we look at the state of brewed coffee, it remains the top beverage consumed at breakfast, but drinking rates have softened in favor of hot tea, which is a really interesting category in the morning, and also specialty coffee variants. Lots of different ways to look at the big coffee dynamic, and we cover that pretty fully within the report. And of course, our needs are shifting. 5 H's, hunger, hurry, health, and habit, and hot and hearty. Hot and hearty are actually rising in importance at the breakfast occasion. Also, lots of questions around snacking, and again, we cover that very fully in the report. The top foods we're consuming at snack this year: fresh fruit, chocolate, some very strong growth of chocolate, think about those affordable indulgence. It's a similar case for potato chips, followed by yogurt, cookies and crackers have really had a sensational rise over the past 3 years. If we look at the factors influencing category performance, we see that it remains a robust behavior, and afternoon remains the largest snacking day part. We do see some shifting priorities at afternoon, but it is still the largest day part. We see rising portability demand, it's up 14% versus 2021, but it does remain about 19% behind the pre-pandemic rates, so expect portability for snacking to rise as a priority for consumers. Lots of opportunity for manufacturers there. If we look at health versus indulgence, it's an equal split. Despite what you might hear, 50% of all occasions are motivated by healthy motivations. 50% are motivated by indulgent motivations, although a little bit of a change is pushing more indulgence into the evening out of the afternoon. And then finally, I mentioned earlier, really importantly, especially the special occasion landscape. We do see a rebounding in celebratory gatherings and special occasions, but the landscape at large is changing. So just remember our population diversity, less celebrations in those traditional Christian Judeo holidays, and an enormous of new occasions or celebratory gatherings rising that give you a great opportunity for incrementality. We've touched on a lot today, but to tell you the truth, we've literally just scratched the surface of the deep content in the report. A couple of takeaways. Just remember, consumers are refocusing on what value means to them. It's a more personal choice and choosing more intentionally as a result. It's clear consumers are changing priorities, perhaps in preparation for a few tight years ahead. And while that is underway, it's still encouraging to know that in the midst of cutbacks, affordable indulgences, that lipstick effect still exists, and there is still a strong desire for high quality experiences. So remember, it's those who understand evolving consumers' needs and habits, and those who really explore for products and brands flexible usage fits, so I don't just fit one occasion, I can have multiple fits. They commit to quality, understanding the broader social forces, and I think espousing timelessness is also really important. So remember, the full CHATS report is available today, and there are there's a lot of questions, so just a quick time check. Maybe we'll just take one question in the interest of time. Just wanting to understand the plant-based marketplace a little bit more. We capture this very fully within the context of the report itself, and it really is a rising topic fueled by lessitarianism. So 47% of people who engaged in plant-based consumption in an average day are lessitarians who have not given up animal products, but who are looking to cut back on a weekly basis. What was most interesting from some of the work that we did around plant-based is that while health and the environment have always been the core drivers, the cost of meat and dairy, so the notion of pricing, actually topped both of the drivers of health and the environment. So maybe this is a tipping point for the segment overall. I mean, we'll have to see what the future holds, but people opting for more plant-based or meat alternatives as cost, health, and the environmental forces all converge together. So that's what I have for you today. Thanks everybody for joining me, and over to you, Ellen.
Wow, that was a very packed session. Thank you so much, Kathy. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We do have some more questions, and Kathy will respond to those by email. You will also receive an email to today's recorded presentation, but that is likely to come in the next couple of days. In the meantime, please take a look at the handout section in the event control panel, where you can learn more about the research we shared today. And of course, at any time, we welcome the opportunity to speak with you directly, so please feel free to reach out to Kathy with her info there on screen. That now concludes today's webinar. Have a wonderful day, everyone.